Commissioner Miles.
Here.
Commissioner Short.
Here.
Commissioner Miller. Commissioner Perkins. Commissioner Estelle.
Yes. Oh, here, yeah. Next, be the approval of May the 17th, 2023 meeting minutes. Someone had a chance to look at those?
I think there's one correction, but that's been done. I'd like to make a motion that we approve the May 17, 2023 meeting minutes.
Second.
Commissioner Shu.
Yes.
Commissioner Miles.
Yes.
Commissioner Short.
Yes.
Commissioner Miller.
Yes.
Commissioner Perkins. Commissioner Estelle.
Yes. Next on the agenda is zone map amendment for Trifecta Blue, property located at 291 Taste Creek Avenue, current zone R1A, R2, and R3. Proposed zone to R1A, R2, and R3. And this is also a public meeting on this for the, if anyone has anything to say.
Thank you. Doing good, thank you.
Thank you.
So, good afternoon. For the record, Preston Worley, McBrayer Law Firm, on behalf of the applicant. Now, as your all's custom, the city is placing the sign on the property. So your clerk already has a picture of the sign that was placed on the property, and then I've got, for the record, a copy of the Richmond Register where the newspaper ad. So some of you all may be scratching your head and thinking, we just did this. In December of last year, this exact property came before you for a zone change, which you approved. And what you're looking at now seems substantially the same, and that's because it is substantially the same, about 99%. The reason that we're here and asking for another zone change is partly, there was two reasons. Partly, and we'll call it my fault, a little less difficult to say, I was operating off of a exhibit of the acreage that had, unbeknownst to me, between my client and Mr. Wheatley, been slightly changed. And the bottom corner of the property where you see that you all recommended zoning for 4.3 acres of R3, that's tract 4, bottom left-hand corner. My clients thought that I was requesting that you all approve 6.3 acres instead of 4.3 acres. That didn't really come to be an issue until my client started negotiating with Wallach Development, which some of you all will remember. Trifecta Blue and Wallach partnered together for an affordable housing project on Killarney that I think may still be in the building phase, but you all approved that. That's been some years ago. So Wallach needs the 6 acres in order to do their project, which is being proposed to Kentucky Housing Corporation as an affordable senior housing facility. So it would be multifamily, needing the R3, but it will be marketed and deed restricted according to Kentucky Housing's rules for affordable housing for senior living, which I think we all would recognize is a need in every community, including this one. So what we're asking, and what I've given you, the first page is what is the current zoning, which you all approved December of last year. The second page is the proposed zoning we're requesting today. And the third page is our best attempts to show you the difference and what acreage is being moved. And the shading there is intended to show you how all of the various different parcels are being redrawn just a little bit to accommodate this. But I want to show you what is most important, and that I think would, for those that were part of that process then and would be thinking now, we are not requesting additional R3 acreage. We are asking you to let us take the R3 acreage from the top of the property, that was tract 1, take 2 acres from that tract and put that 2 acres onto tract 4. So just, even though you see all of this, the lines slightly changing to accommodate the R2, the R1A, at the end of the day, what we're asking, if you approve it, there will be the exact same acreage in this project of R3, the exact same acreage of R2, and the exact same acreage of R1. We're simply moving 2 acres from the top to the bottom so that we can accommodate Wallach Development's design and proposal for the senior housing. So I would put to you, you've already approved this as is. That particular area that we're asking about, that currently 4 acres could be, and is intended to be an R3 development. It will still be an R3 development, but senior housing, I'm sure you can imagine, is less intense even if more acreage. Generally, seniors don't drive as much. The facilities are intended to encompass more of what they would need for their day-to-day living. So we really think that this is a net same, if not a net less intense, even though we're moving some of the acreage around. So that will take 2 acres from what is intended to be market rent multifamily that you have already approved, and moving that 2 acres down to restricted senior affordable rent at the bottom. Again, you all already found that this configuration is substantially the same as this, is in conformity with your comprehensive plan, and I would just put to you for the record today and restate that your comprehensive plan asks for a diversity of housing types to accommodate all residents, and we certainly know that seniors are in need of affordable housing in our community. I believe it's pretty straightforward, but I know that table and that chart can look a little confusing, so I'd ask any questions. I see Dr. Miller's already.
So basically, you're reducing the R3 in the top section, increasing the bottom, and you're taking part of the R1A to do that.
Well, we are moving the R1A around.
Yes.
The same R1A will be there. We're also taking and moving some of the R2. So that tract, what are we calling it? Tract 2, that's currently zoned R2. A large portion of that is being taken for the new R3 on the bottom, and then some of the R1A in the Tract 3. But then we're pushing the Tract 3 R1A up towards the top where we're taking away the 2 acres. So the lines move in several different places to accommodate, to make sure that the R2 acreage and the R1 acreage stays the same, in generally where it exists. And then, of course, the R3 acreage stays the same, but is being moved from one end to the other. So
in other words, was in the bottom down here, it doesn't have enough acreage to do what you want to do with, right?
yes, sir,
For the
that's correct.
seniors.
Yes, sir.
And that was initially as seniors to start with, right?
Was it initially seniors? Initially, it was just going to be market rent, multifamily. They were proposing some sort of townhouse sort of project, which could have been marketed towards seniors. This will be, because part of the financing will come from Kentucky Housing, this will be required and deed restricted to be senior housing and at some level of affordability.
Will that area be maintained by any other entity, or is it just people that live there take care of it?
So Wallach Development is intending to purchase the property and do the development. So that private developer would maintain the property. And according to the way these projects work with Kentucky Housing Corporation, there would have to be a management company in place that was certified and approved, that maintained, and then there's certain levels of that go even beyond what your codes enforcement would be of standards that the property would have to be kept because it's in part publicly financed.
Usually when we get a change in zoning, it's usually like a new change. But Philip, I think this is really, when you say it's a change in the zone tracts, the size of them. It's a little different than what we usually deal with.
Well, it's, I guess it was unique compared to the
Well, you like to
traditional.
word it right in the minutes
Yeah,
because.
normally it's a zone change of a larger tract. Really, I think what Mr. Worley's saying is really, if you look at it as an overall
Yeah.
site, which is kind of the way it was brought in. Yes, it's different tracts with different zones, but the intent is one large development. So if you look at it that way, you're not increasing the density, you're just moving some lot lines around so that they can accommodate the project for that particular parcel and zone. So now, to your point, if they, if they were coming in today and saying, well, let's leave the existing R3, the big tract, the 24 acres, let's leave it 24 acres and let's take from the R2 or the R1 and make this R3 larger, which would increase the apartment density, that would be a little bit different, I think. But this really doesn't change very much. It actually, in my opinion, accommodates a project we would like to see. So this is, I think you may have, Mr. Worthing may have mentioned, I'm not sure, but the project on Killarney and Shamrock, that's the same developer, and so it'll be a similar, it may look different, but it'll be the same, similar type of project that will be a senior housing, I believe.
So, yes.
So, to me, and the other thing to throw out, I've not talked to developers or engineers about this, but this is in a back corner. So obviously, they'll have to come up with some type of plan. If, let's say, this R3 is developed first, they'll have to come up with a plan to get from Tate's Creek to that, which should encourage development in the R1 to get to the R3. So it won't be like they, not that they would do this, but it limits the possibility that they would come in with a development plan but only build the apartments and then walk out and leave. So overall, in my personal opinion, I think it makes sense and it accommodates the project, and they're not asking for an increase in density, so I think it's certainly something that should be considered.
Well, I appreciate that, Philip. If I could just add to part of a lot of this is really kind of legal formulaic. This was more than I think that your staff is empowered to do at an administrative level without coming back to you all. And when you look at the ordinance that was ultimately passed based on your all's recommendation, it details out the lines that we had. And so we think, even though we're not really changing the project, it is enough of a legal change that we needed to come back in front of you. And I'm sorry, Chairman Estelle, I thought we were getting ready to say something.
No,
and
I
I kind of.
was just, like Phil said, it's really not changing the zones itself, it's just making them larger, everything's staying the same on there.
Yes, sir.
Any more questions? I get a motion on this project for the zone map amendment?
Public comment.
Pros and cons.
I'm sorry, yes. Is it anyone here that has any pros and cons to that? For it or against it? Okay. I get a motion.
Motion.
Accept.
Go ahead.
Second.
Go ahead, Dave.
Okay. And Ms. Perkins, you seconded,
Second.
right? Okay. Commissioner Shu,
Yes.
Commissioner Miles, Commissioner Short,
Yes.
Commissioner Miller,
Yes.
Commissioner Perkins,
Yes.
Commissioner Estelle.
Yes. The next order of business is a zone map amendment for Dogs LLC, property located at 204 Concord Road, currently zone UC7, proposed zone R2 and R3, and this is also a public hearing on this.
Mr. Stone, do you have the plat which indicated the individual zones was filed with an amendment on 6/12 of 23?
I only have the old one.
Not a problem. Good afternoon, everybody. Corey Isaacs on behalf of the petitioner in this matter. This is a petition for zone change from an initial voluntary annexation. The address of the property is 204 Concord. Concord is depicted on your right on the screen. However, it's not quite fair to call it Concord. The petitioner has no wish or indication to have any access to Concord. Practically, it's floodplain anyway. That area tends to flood somewhat regularly. And as you see on the right side of the screen, there's a significant portion of this property which is within a floodplain, so you can't necessarily build there either way. The petition here is for two proposed zones. The first zone would be an R3 zone, which is indicated as Lot 1. Now, I had filed an amendment to the initial application, which came out with the annexation. I don't know if we can, is there any way that we're able to depict this on the screen?
Possibly. Do you know how you submitted it?
I dropped it off. Yeah, please, thank you, Mr. Frazier. I think Mr. Frazier is going to be kind enough to make copies of a additional drawing. However, for all intents and purposes, it's the same border. Now, as you look at the map and the plat in front of you, on the left side, on the top, you'll see that there is an easement. The development on Benson Drive, which is directly to the south in this picture, Benson Drive was developed years ago. A part of the development, they required an easement from this track to Judah Bear Lane. The idea was that this track would be developed, and a part of the initial development, they required an easement for ingress and egress to connect to Judah Bear Lane to allow for multiple points of entry, which the comprehensive plan requires or suggests. Now, here in a few moments, when Mr. Frazier returns, you'll see that on the left side of the plat, which would encompass the pond as it's shown, we have requested, and that's going to be about 22 acres, give or take. We've requested an R3 for multifamily dwellings. That would be connectivity-wise an extension of Benson Drive, which is already the same. It's one continuous idea. Now, to the right of the pond, we're requesting R2, which will be townhouses. Now, those townhouses, it creates an appropriate buffer pursuant to the comprehensive plan between the single-family residences, the multifamily residences that are a part of the Benson Drive development, which go all the way down to the corner of Concord as well. The development ordinance recognizes that there should be multiple uses of housing to provide for all needs. The buffers that are suggested within the comprehensive plan are appropriate, and you go from one being R3 to another R3, and then the next being R2, which is above single-family residential. So you have the appropriate steps of density between all of the different zones. I think the largest impact, and I think the strongest argument is that this was before this commission years ago when they developed Benson Drive, which is why you have that easement. This was a part of, and which was required prior to the approval of Benson Drive to establish that easement. The connectivity works, the density works, the buffers between zone, it all certainly complies. Now, I think here comes Mr. Frazier. Thank you, sir. Yeah, please. Now, what you're seeing now is the development plat, which was received by the city on 6/12 as a part of the amendment. And that occurred after the voluntary annexation, or the intent to, was approved, which calls for an initial zoning, that's what this is. Ah, lovely. Thank you, Ms. Frazier. So on the map, which is now displayed, on the left, you see Benson Drive on the very bottom. That zone is the same exact zone that's to the south there. You see Benson Drive depicted. You would be moving forward with the same exact zone, the same type of developments. On the right side where it would be R2, you see the large floodplain. Now, this is 59 acres. However, even if you, not even taking into effect the floodplain, we're going to lose 30% to infrastructure just by the very nature of the development. So that leaves us with somewhere in the lines of 31 acres to develop. Now, we do have a large pond that would probably be located right where Lot 1, the number 1, is depicted. And that's going to serve as a green space and retention area. So even less acreage would be involved in that scenario. The easement above Lot 1 is the easement that's depicted to Judah Bear Lane, again, which was a part of the initial development of Benson Drive and was requested and required by the city prior to that approval. So we're just, we're coming in after the development, continuing with the same thought, the same plan that the city was a part of in the very beginning.
Does this come off of, so this, if I'm going down Irvin Road, I turn left onto Concord, is that correct?
For 911 purposes, that is the address that is given. Now, there's not an entry from Concord.
So the entry's going to be where?
The entry is through Benson Drive. So if you were to go to the gas station, the new, well, new is relative, I guess, but you have the storage units on your left, and you have the gas station, the development there, that's Benson Drive. Practically speaking, it would be impossible to connect to Concord. We also recognize, what Concord is. That traffic, that wouldn't be appropriate, and that's certainly not what we're asking for. However, even if we were, we have a very large floodplain that we couldn't get across that.
So,
I think there's a creek.
Yeah, there's a creek and there's an awesome swing bridge that's been there forever where the folks go to and from.
so on this plat, there's a cute little subdivision that looks like this is, what, north of that subdivision?
It would,
That's
so if we would turn onto Concord, that subdivision would be on your left, your
Right.
immediate left. Yes, Mr. Stone has the arrow, that's the subdivision there. So that would be the single-family element, which is bordered by the townhouses that we're proposing, and it gives the buffer between the multifamily. Now, the R3, which the cursor is over now, it borders another R3, which is the comprehensive plan tells us that we should border like-kind zoning, and that's exactly what we're presenting here today.
So, you was talking about that Shell Mart.
Yes, sir.
I think that's the road we're talking about right there to come out.
You do come that way, but then you kind of veer to the left and go into the development, but yes.
Now, I think up on top of the hill, what are those up there, Philip? Are those,
Where exactly are you talking about?
if you turn there by that Shell Mart, they'll be up on the hill on the left-hand side up there. That development right there, I think we approved that. That was the one that we talked about a PUD several years ago.
It is a PUD, yeah.
And it didn't, yeah.
And is that on Benson Drive? Yeah,
Well, it's not on
It's
Benson,
not
it's
on
Regency Circle.
Regency Circle, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as a part of that, I think we're speaking all on the same. That was a part of the easement that was required when everything was done. It's just for connectivity purposes, and it makes sense. If you're going to connect, you give multiple points of ingress and egress. And that was the idea when this commission and the city required it.
So what is right below the R3? Right.
Another R3, it's the additional, that would be Benson Drive, which is the same development, the same idea that we're doing here.
So apartment, 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 and then you've got
And then you transfer into R2, which is, it's capable for duplexes. However, that's certainly not our intention. Our intention is to do townhouses.
essentially duplexes.
They're going to look a lot different. Our intention, which is based on a previous development that he's done, they would have a garage in the front with street access. That garage would be separate, would be a separate structure. As you go through the garage, then you enter into a green space and walk to a townhouse. They look different than what Madison County is used to for duplexes. However, it is, multifamily within the same density requirements.
Good. How many units are we talking about?
At this point, I couldn't tell you, and I'm certainly not willing to guess. We have so much of an issue with the floodplain and then our infrastructure. Of course, the comprehensive plan allows for an R2 5.1 per acre. Even if you eliminated the floodplain, we're not talking about a large number here. There's just not enough land.
Okay.
On that map right there, where are you talking about development? Right there.
Correct. So, Mr. Stone, where the large red dot is, if you can, that would be Benson Drive, the largest red dot there. Now, we will continue to, that was stubbed out for the purpose of this development. And as you go forward into the area in which we're asking for an initial zone, you would have the same exact type of zoning, which is what your comprehensive plan, suggests. It's not required. And then as you would move to the right of the vacant farmland, which is subject to the annexation and initial zoning, then that's where you would get into townhouses. On the bottom right-hand corner, you do see the subdivision, Commissioner Perkins, that you mentioned. And as you move up and down, you create the buffer of single-family, then multifamily in regards to your townhouses, coming back to multifamily with your R3. But is there?
Kind of what's already developed out there.
Yes.
It really is. I mean, if you're across from the old Redhead gas station where that's where it is. You've got all those apartments and some condos and then back in there.
If it'll help everybody, which if everybody's clear where it's at and how you get there and what's around it, then I won't do anything. But if you'd like, I think if we can get that pointer and
I
we'll,
looked for it earlier and I don't see it. Is it, you think, within?
we had,
No.
maybe it's in the drawer. Either way, if you take,
And I will, if I may.
I'll do it. Let me do it. That way, let me just show them where it's at. Okay, so basically, this is the Urban Road bypass intersection. So you come down, you have Man Chrysler, and you come down, we have the storage units that are on, so there's I think this is where the liquor store is at in this area. This is Benson Drive, and this is basically, this is all PUD. The little development, the cute development, I think, it's down here, Oxford Circle. These are like, I think they call them little bungalows, but little houses.
Yeah.
But what you'll do is you'll turn here, and this road goes straight and dead ends now. This is where the access is to this tract of land, which is what they're talking about developing. The easement is back there that will connect over to the new triplex townhome that we have in Ash Park. Okay? Does that make sense where we're at
So
now?
it will be used as an egress
Well, and
eventually, maybe, or?
And to throw this out as well, we don't know. What we know right now is there is a undeveloped tract of land in the county that they would like to have annexed into the city with these zones. So the way to look at it now is we don't have a development plan in front of us. So we don't know, I mean, really like, it's not that they're bad questions to say, what are you gonna build? But really right now, it's hard to base it on that because if it's rezoned annexed in, they can come back with whatever site plan, whatever development plan, what they're gonna build could change. It could be annexed in and set for a decade. You see what I'm saying? It doesn't necessarily have to be developed. But there are access points that when they do come in with a development plan, we do intend to require access. So it's important to bring those up, but the lower level is, the use is the way to look at where it's PUD. So going up Benson Drive, the use is all multifamily, which is R3 essentially. Then you transition over to some condos and then some more multifamily. along that same property line, and then there's a big hill that drops off, and then you go down to Oxford Circle, the nice neighborhood,
Right.
or single-family area. So there'll be no access off Concord. The road's not designed for it, and there's obviously floodplain issues and bridges that have to be built, so there'll be no access there. But if the development at some point is completed, they would connect and have the ability to connect through the Ash Park or Hidden Hills subdivision, either direction, to go to the bypass, 4 Mile, or they would be able to come down Benson Drive and go straight to Urban Road.
I think when that part, if I'm not mistaken, Philip, when we talked about that Ash Park, that was all part of that farm anyway, wasn't it? And they just got developed the
so.
part what it is now.
Right.
Because they didn't want all of it at that time. They just wanted that part back in Ash Park. So it was all the same land, to start with when they developed that Ash Park back through there.
And just to throw out for sake of discussion regarding zone change, and best practices, the R3 zone they're requesting, it will adjoin an R3 use. So there will not be a transition, that we don't want to see from an R1 to an R3. There is some land between that R3 tract and Ash Park and a valley there, and it's owned by a different property owner, but the Ash Park area that it would connect to is basically an R2. And then as you turn and go into Hidden Hills, it then becomes R1. But there's buffer there. And then it would transition over to R2, which would then adjoin that
So
R1 in the PUD part.
at this point, there's only one road in and out of this big development, right?
Technically, there's Benson Drive that stubs out to it.
Right.
And then I think you can access it from Concord now, but it's not a
No, you can't do
development.
that, yeah.
It's just undeveloped land.
No,
It's just a big farm.
Yeah, I saw that, and I saw Concord, and you don't want traffic on that road. But you have to have egress, don't you?
Yeah, well, we have that.
You have
That's
that,
what we're saying. Yeah, we have it from Benson, and then we have it stubbed over to Judah Bear, I think is what it's called, in Ash Park. We have
Okay,
that
so it's back in
access
there somewhere.
easement
Okay.
where there'll be city streets. And
Okay.
what we
Mr.
will do if it's
Stone,
developed, we
you
will
flip back to the
eliminate
map.
access to Concord.
We
Well,
have
soon.
no intention of touching Concord. That wouldn't make sense for our development. The cost that would be involved, it's not economical.
Yeah.
And Commissioner Perkins, if you look, you can see Judah Bear and there. So that will provide another access, but again, we're not to the point of that.
And you
And I
won't
would assume-
connect- You won't connect to that little subdivision.
No, ma'am.
Okay, good.
That subdivision, as the land contours on the subject property, the relevant property that we're talking about, that area down there, that's floodplain anyway. So although we're asking for the property immediately to the north, as is depicted here, to be zoned in a certain way, that property is worthless because the creek rises and it's in a floodplain. So for development purposes, it's going to be very much away from your neighborhood that we're discussing to the bottom right. And, I certainly can't speak for the city, but if I asked to only have one ingress and egress and during the planning phase, they wouldn't let me. They're going to
Okay.
require that we go across.
Okay, good.
And we certainly intend to. I mean, that makes for the connectivity in which the comprehensive plan requires. And that's a part of the idea that we have at this point. However, we can't formulate that idea until we have the proper zones and come before this commission.
Any more commissioners' questions? Is anyone here from public? Okay, you, one at a time, just come up here and give your name, please.
Good evening. I live live on Oxford Circle, towards the very end of this development. We have some concerns as a neighborhood. We have a very close Facebook group that we keep connected with our neighbors on. I'm glad to hear that there's not going to be a connection point through our neighborhood, but we've had the topography of that land there that they're talking about, the floodplain. That hillside's very fragile, and we've experienced, as several people in the neighborhood have experienced, some runoff from that hill. I think that's one of our concerns as a neighborhood, that we'll experience more flooding, especially as the ground is disturbed at the top of that hill. And then the other concern that I can think of right off the top of my head, there's technically 2 entrances that are going back there right now. One's by the gas station, and the other's through that apartment complex. You can turn either direction to get to Benson. It's extremely heavy traffic on 52. So if we're going to develop more property back there and invite more families, especially multifamily who have several vehicles probably, it's going to be a very increasing danger on 52. So that's one of our concerns.
I think on the, speak maybe for all, it's on the hillside you're talking about. I think that would be, whenever they would develop that, he might be able to answer that better on that.
In regards to the runoff, we would certainly have to comply with all the planning and zoning requirements, and then a part of the building requirements. We would be required to have topography studies. We would have to build, if there would be any portion of it that would create runoff or excess, we would have to build a retaining portion. And from what I understand, we can't get down that far because of the issues that she addressed. And the city would be governing us throughout the entire portion of the build and the phase for the building. So the city certainly wouldn't allow us. We certainly wouldn't want to build on anything that would be running off. It would not be the hill to build the church on. We wouldn't do that. And to address the concern there, we couldn't build, we wouldn't build, and even if there was the creation of additional runoff, we would be bound by the city's requirements, in which we would abide by, or the city would stop us throughout our project. So certainly a relevant question and a very good question, but I don't expect what our intentions to be to come anywhere close. We can't build on that rock.
When you give us a plat, can you designate that as non-buildable?
Well,
Or do we need to have an engineer look?
Before I get there, I have to come through you guys first.
Okay,
And then once, so this property was in the county initially. So we went through the process for a voluntary annexation. The city commission expressed their intent and wish to annex the property into the city from the county. Now, as part of that process, if it's in the city at this point, we don't have a zone. We have no zone whatsoever. So this is the initial zoning of new property acquired from a county-owned property into the city. You have to give it a name, right? And here we're asking for the certain zones to be the name, and that will then allow us to come back to the city with our plan for the development, and we would be bound for the preliminary plat, the final plat. The city's a part of every portion of that, from roadway, structure, infrastructure, et cetera.
Is there anyone else? Give us your name, please.
I'm Todd Branham. I live in Oxford Circle as well, about midway down on the left side. I got my land surveyed when I bought the house about 3 years ago, and at least on my side of the street, nothing that I'm aware of, and my survey did not show was a floodplain. It was only the side closest to the river. So them discussing that our neighborhood, I would like to see that survey, because mine that I had done prior to purchasing my home did not have that. I'm not sure. I was actually discussing and looking at the different zoning of R3 and R2. If you look at that map on the left side of the subdivision Oxford Circle, there are actually above that hilltop, the same exact apartment complexes, almost identical, 3 to 4 stories as what's on Benson Drive. So that is designated R3, but there's an R2, and I don't know who, didn't go through that and do enough research prior to this meeting, because I just came from work. But on R2, I don't understand how that can be a townhouse, right, has, 2 different sides of the garage in the middle that separates, as they're describing. But right above my home and above this whole neighborhood, there's about probably a dozen apartment complexes, 3, 4 stories, just like Benson Drive. So to me, that classifies an R3, especially looking at the density. So I'm kind of confused how those were built. So that's one question. And then the second question, I'm not against, economic development here and us building that. But one question I do have, and I know they're in the initial building stages, is what kind of properties are we building, right? I want to know, is this going to lower our property value? Because are we putting like granite in, or these nice apartments, or what kind of apartments are we putting in here? And I'm all for equal opportunity housing in our community. But where I come into the issue is this going to significantly reduce our property value? Because after looking at our estimate, what our home has appraised for, with the new zones that were built above our home, we have all dropped in value, if you look at it, at our estimate. That's why I believe it's an R3 and an R2. That might be a different discussion, might be something the zoning committee wants to look at. But again, I'm all for economic development, but there's a lot to be unanswered, and I think a lot of muddiness going on saying Oxford Circle is a complete floodplain, because I do not see a survey, unless someone here can provide that states that. Other than the far right side beside the creek. If you see the creek running, where there's no homes right across, that is the designated floodplain. So we can say here, hey, this is all floodplain, we're not gonna build, but until push comes to shove, are we actually gonna have surveyors out there and watching to make sure where they're building, where they're not? Because I know there are some people in this community that live in Oxford Circle, that it's gonna back right to their back door, where they're planning on, not me, but others. So that's just something I ask. If this was your home, what would you allow?
Philip, what would that be on that floodplain? On the floodplain that he's concerned about, he said that he has no, what was
My
it?
survey of my home does not state
Not
that
showing any
there's a floodplain on my property of the houses. It's actually the side right by the creek where there's no homes built
So what's
currently.
the question? Where is the floodplain?
Yeah.
Well, that's all
It's
set up.
not showing, he said
That's basically a federal map that'll show you all that, but the way, I think what changes, I'm not saying what's depicted here is floodplain or not, okay, 'cause I don't know for sure, based on what I have here. But one easy way, I think that creek turns some past the lots, there's kind of like a little bump out cul-de-sac at the end of, at Oxford Circle there, where it adjoins his property. Certainly the area he's talking about, there's a sizable creek there, and there's some gazebos there. That, I'm fairly confident, is floodplain, and then it'll follow that creek area. But again, the way I would look at it, I wouldn't necessarily worry about floodplain right now, because as he mentioned, if you have X number of acres and the city ordinance allows you to build 14.2 acres, say, or units in R3 per acre, all right, they have 60 acres. I'm not saying that's what's here, I'm just throwing out numbers, and 10 of that's floodplain, they still essentially would be able to build a 3-story building. And so for the purposes of this, I think it really comes down to transitioning from one use or zone to the next. Is that appropriate? And is this appropriate area for these zones and uses? I think connectivity is important. But the floodplain part, to say, well, how many units are they actually gonna be able to get in there or not, I think that's probably a little early to and that's an R2, and to talk about, to let that weigh too heavy on making the decision now for what we're talking about tonight, just because we don't know what they're gonna do in reality. I mean, if you zone it R2, they may come in with a design where there's garages in between them, or designs where they're connected and there's 20 of them in a row, So that's kind of my thought. I do believe there is some floodplain there, and if it's in the zone that it's showing floodplain, then they will not be able to build in that, as in we wouldn't allow them to build in it.
And, yeah, and at this point, we can't designate we want a green space between the Oxford Circle and,
That's
yeah,
right,
so we
'cause
can't
don't
do
know.
anything at this
Now, when they
point.
come back with a subdivision of land, like we're gonna look at, so for example, on the next item on the agenda, that's when you really say, we want this buffer, we want, make sure with the roads lay out a certain way and communicate with the access points, and look at the types of units and some things
So-
if you would.
Yeah, so that's when we really need the people that live in that
Yeah,
subdivision to come.
and one point I would like to make, while we may be discussing there's no plan, right? Let's say the density for R2 is 5 per acre. They're saying 60. Let's say worst case scenario, they get 30. That's 30 times 5, that's 150 apartments going right there. Let's say they do 40 acres out of the 60, that's 200 additional apartments. So we can say we don't know, we're gonna guesstimate numbers, but worst case scenario, surely that you can make at least 50% of what you're given in that zone and building. And if a modest 5, and I believe, I'm not, familiar with this, let's say it's 6 is the regulation for R2, but 5 at minimum, because let's say we throw in some garages, it's 150 to 200 additional apartments. So this isn't a measly, 100 apartments, it's going up 50 apartments. This is a significant construction build. And to their point about the runoff, with the R2 that I'm questioning, if it's truly an R2 building that's going above, which is a different issue that we'll look into later, above Oxford Circle, I mean, there's significant runoff that during any type of storm from that construction is flowing all down into Oxford Circle, including wood, I have pictures, wood, all kinds of building materials that get blown down there with no type of fencing. And complaints have been filed to them and asked them to clean it up and with nothing. So, I mean, this is just more that I think is a better discussion, and I just want to kind of quantitate and give you some idea how many apartments are going in here. We can say it's not many, but at minimum, you're looking at 150 to 200, at minimum, right beside the small bungalows, as they call it, which is our homes. But that's all I wanted to do is make that point. Thank you.
If I could add something, I think we're kind of saying the same thing in the first part of what you said about the density. I think I'm with you. To his point, we need to look at it like the maximum number. And I think
Yeah.
that's what he's saying. So for example, if my arithmetic is correct,
And I don't mean to interrupt, I have to go to another work meeting, but I don't want, and I know that you all are very capable, that's why we voted you into these positions, but to say we don't have a plan, we're not gonna give numbers and estimates, and then we're trying to play the numbers game when we bring up something and say, well, if we're gonna do that, let's do this number. I don't want this to be skewed as a numbers game that, oh, well, they're saying 200, really, it's gonna be 100. And then when push comes to shove, and we get the building plan, it's gonna be triple that. You all are all smart, that's why we elected you all, we trust you all, and to be our voice. So, thank you for your time.
okay, so, if it's roughly 35 acres, if you take off the point too, and you have 5 units, excluding floodplain and all that stuff, the maximum is roughly 177 plus or minus in the R2 units.
And that's just,
Now, when the actual plan comes in, it probably will be less than that when you take roads and all that thing in, green space and floodplain, all that. But for the purpose of this, I actually agree with just, you would consider the potential of roughly 177 or so units for the R2. And the R3, I have roughly 300 plus, 308 units.
but that's assuming you were building on a flat table.
That's all right, flat table with no roads, no green space, no amenities.
No hills,
things
No
valleys,
infrastructure
nothing.
whatsoever, which would be absolutely and legally impossible to do. And to address the runoff, right now, it's agriculture in the county, which very much, it's a very lackadaisical rural association with agricultural land. If there's a runoff on agricultural land, there are no improvements on that land, which have to comply with regulations. It's a cattle field. Now, if I had a runoff issue and my neighbor wished to develop it, then my neighbor would then be complying with all the regulations, would be governed by the city to adapt and then prevent runoff. Because right now, there's no mechanism to prevent that. What we're asking is for the appropriate zones within the comprehensive plan. It does give the stages and the buffers between the zone. It also complies with connectivity, and then it also complies with everything that's on Benson, which has been stubbed out since the development of Benson in 2005, and then will also connect to the easement, which was granted I would hate to give the year, it's been a few, but this was all a part of the idea to have that connectivity. Nobody wanted to have the future road there to drive to the cattle field. This is certainly something that has been in the works and a part of the plan, and it complies with every portion of the comprehensive plan and the development regulations.
Okay. Someone else? Just state your name, please.
Hi, my name is Linda Duty, and I live on Concord Road. I just have a question, and that may take care of everything that I want to ask. The shaded portion of the plat, does that represent the flood zone, or does that represent property that they want annexed into the city, or have I misunderstood?
I think it's the floodplain.
It would be both.
Be both.
That portion is being requested to be annexed, and that hatched area is a depiction of the floodplain area.
Okay, so then I have a further question. I know that it's floodplain, and right now, nobody can build on it. You know, it's undeveloped and will remain so. But we also know that developers have filled in land that is in the floodplain and have built on it, because there's regulations that say that they can do it, you know, as long as it conforms with everything else. It's been done before. And as someone said before, Concord Road is a very, very small road. There are places where 2 cars can't pass. So if that is developed in the future, and I know that's another if, but if it's annexed into the city, then there is a possibility that that could happen. Then our roads will not suffice for the traffic that would be on there. And I know that the road would have to be widened if there was development there. But if it's approved that the zone is changed now, then later on they can say, this has been approved, so we can use it for that purpose. And the department, ask the Department of Transportation to come in and widen the road or whatever they need to do, and that means the property is going to be taken from the property owners to widen the road. So, and again, I don't pretend to know, you know, what's going on and what could go on. Those are just my questions.
Yes, I think, Philip, on that road, would that have to come through the county? Is that a county road?
Eugene,
It's considered a county road, right?
Mr. Estelle, is your microphone on?
Yes.
Yes. It's-
Oh, okay.
And I can't hear very well. just so you
She's
know.
concerned about the, if it is annexed in, and about the road traffic. I was just asking, that is a county road, right?
Yes,
Concord.
Concord is a county road, and it is a narrow road, and it certainly could not accommodate very
Yeah,
much
it couldn't
traffic.
accommodate.
But most likely, there will not be, at least from this development, based on, even if they brought in R1, there would not be a connection to Concord.
Plus you have the established creek. I don't know
Yeah,
if you'd
it
be allowed to even
requires-
touch that.
Creek, yeah.
Otter
My understanding, it
Creek.
requires a bridge, and as you all are familiar with, have been here a little while, no developer wants to build a bridge. And we do have connectivity that gets us to the main thoroughfares already. So the way it would be designed, it would take that, if you're in the R2 part down by the floodplain, you would basically drive through that development and either hit Benson Drive or whatever the road is that will take you to Judavere. And there's actually in the comp plan, and we plan to have a stub out in the top portion that will stub out, and as that's developed in behind there, as time goes, you'll go all the way back to 4 Mile.
4 Mile.
Yeah.
Which is the future development. And to speak to your question about the creek, that is a blue line creek, which means it's governed by the Army Corps of Engineers. And before anything can happen, which would disturb the natural flow of that, you have to get approval from them as well. And practically speaking, you know, that creek limits, I mean, it's just not interesting. There's no appeal to go that way whatsoever.
Thank you. Someone else? I think he was. Just come up, state your name, please.
Yeah, my name is Darrell Smith, and I also live on Concord Road. My concern is, and I'm all for growing and developing, but when this does become actual homes, apartments, whatever, right now, without this, 52 from the bypass, basically up to where the Army Depot is dangerous. And you're gonna throw a lot more traffic out there. What happens to 52? Does that become part of the city? Or does it stay just Highway 52? That's a lot more traffic you're throwing out there, and it's already really dangerous.
52 is state of state,
The state highway?
state highway.
I mean, my concern would be with all this additional traffic, even coming out on the bypass side, we need to see a whole lot more streetlights. You know, that's a lot of traffic to throw out there on 52. It's already overloaded at times, and that's my concern.
Okay,
Yeah, tell them about it.
thank you.
You can.
So just state your name, please.
Yeah, I know.
My name is Douglas Riddle, and I have property on Concord Road. I have a start-off question. Has this section already been annexed? Is everything outlined has it been annexed in, or is that part of the discussion today?
None of it's been annexed.
The tracks we're talking about tonight, identified as Lot 1 and 2, have not been annexed into the city, and that's, right now, the phase we're in, and I was gonna mention this anyway, just to make sure, for clarification purposes. The process, the annexation process that we follow, requires an application to the city commission first, and then they review it pertaining to the intent to annex. If they pass that, that means they have a desire to annex it, and they're open to annexing this property into the city. Then it comes to the planning commission, and the property owner will request what zone they want when it's annexed in to be assigned to the property. So at this phase, we really are determining, is R3 and R2 the appropriate zoning classification for these tracts of land, or this tract of land? If approved, it will go back to the commission.
And they could say no.
So the purpose of this basic meeting is to determine if R2 and R3 is appropriate for that land, if in fact it gets annexed into the city.
That's correct,
Correct.
sir, yes.
Good, I just want to make sure I understood. And the developer's representative attorney has done a great job of concentrating on what I heard as like-kind development and keeping everybody's attention off to the left, where there's single-family homes that are very close to each other. Up on the hill, there's a bunch of multifamily units up there. Probably a mix of duplexes and triplexes and so forth. So all of what he says is true, but when you consider what's across the street, what's adjacent to Concord Road, it's a completely different world. Everything down Concord Road, which by the way is probably one of the prettiest roads in the county, they're full of single-family homes and farms, some working farms. We have a cattle lease to a farmer on our property. Full of barns and outbuildings. It's just the most delightful road to drive down. And that's why most of us bought property and built homes or bought existing homes down there. And one of the things that we cherish is coming and going to our home. When we turn off at 52, we get into that other world. There's a beautiful canopy of trees we drive through. There's a creek on the left. There's pasture land. It just reminds us of why we live where we live. And it looks to me like that's all going to change. I want to bring that up because in the legal justification, Exhibit B, that was filed by the developer, it says that, it brings up that the property to the north is multiple properties and multifamily residential. And it says there at the end of that very paragraph in the beginning, that the property and residential use will not interfere with adjacent properties. Well, I think what I just explained would be a huge interference. And I think that the gist of what we're trying to accomplish here is to include everybody. The city is actually within the county of Madison. So all that property to the right, to the east, that's all beautiful farmland and country estates. So I think it would have a most definite impact on the adjacent properties if we consider Concord Road and all the people that come and go down Concord Road. When you drop down that hill from Concord to leave, this is what you're going to see, is all of this. And I've heard all kinds of comments about most likely, and we don't expect, and we intend, and probably about the access across that floodplain. And I would like to see somebody utilize their land as well as the next guy. But to combine that kind of a development next to the country estate and farmland of Concord and that whole Concord community just looks like a mismatch. And I don't know if there's a way you all can stipulate all these most likely, and we don't expect and we don't intend, but it sounds to me like if this gets approved and these zoning designations get approved, the barn door's open. Somebody's going to come back in and say, wait a minute, you annexed this in, you agreed that we can put R2 and R3 out here, and this is what we want to do. So I think that all those questions need to be answered. They say that, I heard something about, for 9/11 purposes, we need to use Concord Road address. Does that mean that it would be too problematic for fire trucks to come through all the side roads to these adjacent multifamily high-density developments? And are they going to try to come down Concord and then realize that there's a little bridge, and the people that get to that one little brick house have to go through wet water to get to their house? But what are they going to do? Are they then going to say, wait a minute, this is a hardship and we do need a bridge? We do need access over here. So I would like to see you guys consider taking in all the things that they don't expect to do and say they won't do, and make it a part of this whole thing, so they can't do it. So you can annex into the city, we can approve your zoning of this, that, or the other, and I don't think that R3 particularly, that, by the way, the question was asked, how many units? 14 units an acre. And I was taking some notes. Right after we talked about 170 units of R2, somebody calculated, I don't know which one it was, I'm sorry, but they said 300 of R3. That's a whole lot of apartments. And, I mean, that's like something you would see outside of New York City, not Madison County and Concord Road. There's just an appropriate place for these things. And the little development that is on the left when you turn into Concord that you were talking about, ma'am, that's a charming little development, but it's single-family homes. I just think there's a place for high-density apartments, and then there's a place for utilizing and appreciating the beautiful land that we have here in Madison County. And the floodplain, there's a question I had in terms of the density. Someone was talking about the floodplain. If it's included in the acreage, then is the total acreage what you use to calculate out how many units you get, or do you have to deduct out the acreage of the floodplain? And I don't know the answer to that. Maybe the city attorney would know.
It would be deducted. Unbuildable land would be deducted.
Good to know. So those are just some of my concerns. And I think that go back to the actual justification for the requested change. And in their first paragraph, they say that it's compatible. Only if you look on one side of it, not if you look on the other side of it. It's not compatible at all. So I'm going to close with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very briefly, just for the purposes of formulating the record, The only reason that Concord Lane is mentioned whatsoever, and I think the gentleman before me said for 911 purposes, that was the address that was given by 911 for this property because it is not, when it was given an address, it did not touch any other roads. So that's the only reason. It's not for the intention for 911 to come off of Concord to service, no fire trucks. That's just the address that 911 gave to the property prior to the development and the access to other roads. It will not have, there will not be a Concord Road address for this property ever again in the event that it's zoned. Thank you guys for y'all's time.
Can I ask you something? No, I can't.
Is-
I can't.
Is there anyone else?
I think she's,
Oh, okay, so.
Can we change the zoning? Or ask them to change the zoning to small homes? And, because if you've got Judah Beer that you can, and just not access through those,
I'll let Ms.
Apartments.
Frazier answer that one if it's okay.
At this time, it is a voluntary annexation, and they are coming forward requesting these zones. So you could deem that the zones that they're putting forward are inappropriate, and so you could say no to what they're requesting. But where it's voluntary, they would have to actually amend it
Yes,
before you. So you could recommend that you would approve it that way, and if they so choose, you could go that way. But here, it's a yes or no as to what they're requesting.
thank you.
Well, we have R3 all over the city. Some of it's inappropriate, as we know. And now we're going to zone another large area R3. I mean, I would think that single-family homes might be better out there. I'm not sure we need to keep building apartments. And I would think that R3 is just not a good thing to do right now. I think we've got enough R3. I'm more inclined for single-family homes, duplexes, that kind of thing, not to keep building apartments. We've got apartments going up all over the place here.
Yeah.
And I know the commission's concerned about it, and I am too, and I'm sure you are. So that's my comment about it. I think the zoning is not what I would want.
Is there any more questions? I'm gonna make a motion.
I make a motion that we do not accept the zone map amendment for Dogs LLC, property located at 204 Concord Road, current zone UC7, proposed zone R2 and R3.
I think the zoning's inappropriate, so I second it.
Inappropriate.
Okay, so the motion is to not approve. Commissioner Shu?
To not accept it?
Correct. Commissioner Miles?
Yes.
Commissioner Short?
Yes.
Commissioner Estelle? Sorry, you said no? Commissioner Miller?
Yes.
Commissioner Perkins?
Yes.
The motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
The,
Thank you for coming and talking.
next on the agenda is the preliminary plot approval for Hampton Hills.
I agree with you.
And if they can, I know they can't go through where all the apartments are, but if they can access Judah Beer and go different, they can do single family.
You can have single-family homes, condominiums there, and you have it half as many, and it wouldn't make it right up against the other homes. So we don't need one. Thank you for
Ask.
He's here, I think. He's sitting back here.
help.
Mr. Cotton is here.
Huh?
Mr. Cotton is here to speak with you.
Yeah, he's
Yep.
preliminary for you.
Yes, my name is Dwight Cotton, developer. This is Phase 1 of Hampton Hills, and it is the the east side of Hampton Way.
Philip,
It's currently zoned
can we do
R2,
this without a lawyer?
I'm sorry,
Can we do this without a
excuse me, the
lawyer?
west.
he's the owner.
Okay.
Are you the,
Okay.
you're the property owner?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so we've submitted a preliminary plat per the Richmond requirements to be approved. All the other construction documents and everything have been turned in. They're still reviewing those as we speak to meet all the current requirements and codes and things that you require.
May I ask a question? Go ahead. Is everyone familiar with where we're talking about? Right
It's
down
just on the
Hampton.
other side of where he was.
Right,
Yeah,
right
it was here
past
last
the,
time.
right past
Well,
the,
last time was the whole thing. This is just
Yeah.
Phase 1.
It was really just kind of on the
Yeah.
other side.
and this is
Yeah.
the side right past the Jehovah Witness.
Yes, it is.
Church, correct?
Yeah, excuse me, it's on the west side. I apologize for that. Be about 46 or 47 duplexes, give or take. We had to adjust it for some of your rules and regulations because of the topography. And I think it meets everything that's required from what the planners and everybody has told us. And so that's what we're here for, your approval of the preliminary plat in the process.
That's correct. My only recommendation, if you make a motion to approve, is that it's contingent upon obtaining signatures. We haven't done all that yet, but, and then that way we can finalize some of the, which I think most of it actually has been finalized, my understanding, but some of the minor issues, but.
Yeah, there was another updated plat submitted this morning.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you have that one,
This
or
is
the
it.
one that was submitted yesterday, last Wednesday. With all, we redid the plat to meet all their notes that the planning and zoning folks had sent us. Which was really showing the green space, showing the mailboxes, showing the square footage of the lots. It was all housekeeping type things, but it's all on there.
These walking trails.
And I know that the city will talk to all the utilities. We have talked to all the utilities, and at this point preliminary, there is no issues. Obviously, it's not been taken around for their signatures yet.
Got any questions from the commissioners?
No.
If not, we'll get a motion.
Yeah, I'll make a motion, we approve the preliminary plat for Hampton Hills contingent upon signatures.
I'll second that.
Commissioner Shu,
Yes.
Commissioner Miles, Commissioner Short,
Yes.
Commissioner Miller,
Yes.
Commissioner Perkins, Commissioner Estelle.
Yes. Thank you. Next is director's report.
I don't have anything to report tonight unless you have some questions for me.
I've got some questions.
I bet you
I
do.
always have questions.
I bet you do.
How about the historic area? Whatever happened to that? They were gonna
Well,
enlarge
that-
the historic area and do all this stuff. What happened to that?
Yeah, that has, we had the initial hearing before the Board of Architectural Review, and they did pass what I'll call the intent to move it to this board. And so we have to do the mailers and notify everyone, and there's, I think, 144 literally letters that go out. So we had to do that for the first meeting, and now we have to, Tyler has to do it again.
And that has to be a public hearing.
But there will be a public hearing, so where we had some other items and plus timing, it was not appropriate for this meeting, but we do intend to have it on next month's agenda. And so there'll be a public hearing for that, and it's possible there's some other items on there, but not sure at this time. But where that it's required to be a public hearing, it'll, instead of trying to do a work session or something, because it's got to be a public hearing anyway, we'll do it at the regular time, and if it's something you want to table and review longer or something like that, then we'll just table it and do it that way. I think is the most appropriate way to do it, so.
The only thing I'd like is some paper copies so we can see where the historic area goes exactly.
I have all sorts to give you.
All right.
Yeah, we'll have, and Mr. Stone worked hard and put all this information together, and it was presented to the city commission when it was discussed, just as a general discussion. but he's identified the current uses of the properties that that will be incorporated into the expansion, the dates that they were built, how many people it affects, a lot of good information like that, so you'll know. And then on top of that, we can have a discussion on what the zone actually, or the district actually means, how it impacts the homeowners and things like that.
I think this is interesting because I know the people that are proposing some of this, what they want to do is extend the historic area. The question I have is not all homes are historic. And the question is, when you expand this, you include homes that aren't historic. So the question is, do you want to do that? I could see hop skipping around. There are certain houses that are historic and you want to save them, et cetera, but, and that's what we talked about, so I'm not sure about that.
Well, if they're not historic, they shouldn't be considered.
Well, I'd like to see what other cities do too. What do other cities do? I thought they went to a certain house like Henry Clay or whatever, and they said, okay, that's historic, or Gary Short's home's historic, or whatever,
I thought the homeowner used to
But
have to
when it,
apply for
yeah,
it.
when it be
Yeah.
left up to
Some
the
do,
homeowners,
yeah, some do, some people wouldn't want to be.
Yeah.
Want to be, or is it?
didn't want to be.
Is it, really? So I don't know. Anyway, the other thing was the zone change on Lancaster. You got one person that wanted to have that zone changed to R1? Tyler? You got one person that called you that said they wanted to change their zone.
For the old house behind the gas station?
Oak Street and those areas, I think.
Yes,
On Lancaster, remember?
Oh, Lancaster.
Has he applied?
we talked, no, we talked on the phone once. He said he wanted to try to get back in touch with him.
Is that window closing?
I'll reach out to him again,
Thought
but
it
yes, there was
Yeah.
one who wanted to, and then there's been a break in contact, so I apologize.
I'd like to see that finished up so that we can just kind of get that off the plate.
Michael Aday.
And then the other thing Coy brought up here was about the traffic studies we talked about, remember? Because we thought some of the roads were really overwhelmed, and maybe we get some traffic studies done by the state.
Yeah.
Are you out there doing those, Philip?
You were talking almost a citywide.
Yeah, we're talking citywide.
Yeah, I'm not, I
Do
don't want
that.
this to sound disrespectful at all, so I hope I say it correct. I'm not sure citywide is something that's practical. You
But the
know,
main
now, if we
roads.
maybe
Main arteries.
break it
Right.
down
Yeah.
into sections somehow and we budget accordingly, and there may be funds now that if we wanted to do a study in a certain area, we could do that. But now, keep in mind, like, for example, if we have a new development, even a subdivision of land where it's already annexed and everything, but it's a subdivision they want to, as we've done in the past, develop a tract of land, we can require a traffic study. Give
Yeah,
us
but
an
that's
idea.
not going to get us any new roads, see?
Yeah,
What
now.
I'd like to do is get some connecting roads, some collateral roads. Like, we always talk about One Nine Boggs Road, is it? That we go up to Sherwood? Yeah, we
Yeah.
always talk
Yeah,
about
Boggs Lane.
Boggs
That's a
Lane, yeah.
mess.
Now, what we have done.
All are really.
They have a connecting road there. Remember, we've always talked about that?
Yeah, and that's on there. What we have done is really more associated, they weren't full-blown traffic studies necessarily, but in the comprehensive plan, we have those connectors and those roads identified, that being one of them, and it makes a lot of sense to do that. What has been taking place up to this point, and I would like to see some movement on the city's end, but we just wait on development. So it's the road, we want to see this road, but, the state doesn't build it, the city doesn't build it, the county, nobody builds it until a developer comes along, then we say, okay, now you have to build it. And there are some sections there, like that Boggs Lane section that may never get built, but it would literally open up
Oh, yeah.
all of Duncannon, that,
But, the problem with that now is that out on Duncannon, they're developing all them subdivisions in there. So where they wanted to come out with the road, they're gonna have to go farther down towards the interstate to get there, which I don't know if that's gonna be feasible or not, because they've got those big farms in there, and people are building on
That's
them.
correct.
So we kind of about missed the
Yeah.
boat on where it was, because all that's being developed out there through there now.
Remember, we talked about it going all the way over to where EKU is and the road over there?
Oh, yeah, you're talking about, coming out on, Kid Carson.
Yes.
But see,
I'd say that'd be
Yeah.
great.
They had-
Because any kind of
they gave
stoppage,
them-
you could pull
well, that was
around.
when Dr. Whitlock was up there. He gave them 5 years to do that. And I don't know where it stands now, if they would even, well, they getting ready to build back over there now. They getting ready to do some development.
Yeah,
So
I
don't
think
know.
there's still that ongoing dispute
Yeah.
between those property owners there. I think there's some litigation involved at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think maybe there were some agreements in the past and, some leadership changed and
Yeah,
some
it's
things stalled
changed, yeah.
out. But the, one I can tell you that that the state is looking at is associated more with the Goggins Lane and then on down Barnes Mill to that Jacks Creek, or no, Jacks Creek's on Crutcher Pike over to Jacks Creek. Is that right?
Yeah.
So kind of a big Tate's Creek, a big connector all the way in that area. Now, I don't know if that means anything will ever get built, but that is something that our staff, city staff, county staff, state staff have all met and looked at that, and there's been a couple meetings. I think there was a public meeting at the, was that at the library? It was. Yeah, so there is some movement there. But we have like Atwood Drive on the Robert Martin, there's some connections there. If it's developed, it gets built, and it'd be nice to have it now, but it's just either, if the city doesn't come in and build it, and then there's some issues with trying to do that anyway, but if the city doesn't come in and build, we have to wait for development. So circling all the way back around, I'm not saying we can't do some traffic studies. We may need to look at our comprehensive plan, discuss that, and then maybe try to pick some areas where we want a traffic study, and then at the same time, take a look at, if we do a traffic study, what are we gonna do with that information? So if say we do one and it says, well, yes, you need to widen this road.
Well, we forward it to the state, wouldn't we?
If it's a state road.
Depends on if it's state road or city road.
Well, if
Or
it's our
county.
road, I mean,
Yeah.
then that's where you would put your money.
Yeah, most likely it wouldn't make a lot of sense to do much on state roads because it would probably just be easier just to go to the state and say, we'd like for you to do a traffic study and consider, if there's any improvements needed for this particular road. Cause
Can we
we
do
did
that
one
for-
in Senate, they would
Can we
probably.
do that for some of those roads?
We could contact the local, transportation, office and see if that would be something they would do.
Hey, what's the
Just call us.
what's the
That's something.
downside on that?
Yeah, and the
I
state
don't
is
see.
doing some, and there's a lot of information online about, traffic counts and things now that is fairly accurate and up to date. But then at the same time, I think we could all probably agree on several areas that we'd like to see improved or, looked at. And as we routinely hear with every development, every project, every annexation, it's traffic. And I think that's legitimate.
We
I'm
could
not-
just push the state a little bit. That's what I was,
Yeah.
put our name up there and
Yeah, so if, maybe at the next meeting, or maybe if we do a work session at some point, we could sit down and kind of have a transportation work session if we wanted to do that. And if we,
I think that'd be beneficial.
and if we kind of do that over time, we could also incorporate that into the next comprehensive plan. But we do have, and I know you all are familiar with this, several areas identified, connectors, expansions for roads, that are identified in the plan, and they're in the order that we'd like to see them as well. And that has been presented to the state, and that was actually presented to, the meeting I was at, and it's kind of how the Jacks Creek, no, what is it? Yeah, but what's the other road out in the county? No, the one down in Barnesville. We just mentioned it.
Crutcher?
Crutcher Pike. That's how that kind of, Crutcher spawned out of that meeting, but that was with state representative, state senator, and judge executive, and some other folks, so.
Let me ask you something. You mentioned concept plan.
Well, initially, off the top of my head, the one thing that's been accomplished or is in the process is increasing our parkland. And that was identified. One of the biggest thing, I mentioned this actually I spoke to the Board of Realtors the other day. One big push that we had throughout the public hearings and meetings that we had where citizens could come in and say what they would like to see in the community, there was a big push for parkland and sports complexes. And that process has been started, and I think if that all evolves and is completed, that, you know, we'll probably satisfy that, at least for the immediate period of time. And other than that, as far as pushing for the parkland, I think we have identified, and they're looking at some additional public safety improvements. Some discussion, I think, from the last city commission meeting, approving, obtaining, I think, the engineer to design some plans for a new police department has been discussed. And then I also think it has guided, which is the intent of it, guided some of the future land development. You know, for example, kind of what we've talked about tonight, but also some of the other land where that we identified. We took a step further, a little bit, an improvement, in my opinion, from the previous comp plans. That, you know, we actually identified and said, okay, if this land is brought into the city, we would like to see it zoned X, if you all remember that. Other than that, it's kind of just a working document that we need to continue to rely on. It's lots of times came up tonight, you know, that it's really a suggestion, and quite frankly, it's really more than a suggestion. It's supposed to be the guiding document to make things easier, like, you know, what was before you tonight, to help you kind of, and the roads are on there, and that is something we need to continue to push for as we develop. And that's why, for example, on this request tonight had those access easements and stub outs, and that came from the comp plan with the idea that somebody's gonna develop in the future, and when they do, we want them to be able to connect to Ash Park. We want them to be able to connect to Benson Drive, and then eventually all the way back through that other land when it develops sometime in the future, so. I'm sorry?
Menards.
Bernard, is that what it is?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I
Menards.
was shocked. I went, they working on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they have obviously started on the construction side of it, and there have been some footer inspections, so literally, you know, the kind of the base, if you want to look at it that way, and they're moving along. There'll be several of those, though. It's a large building. Yeah, they will. They will. And none of that's changed as far as site plan or anything like that. Everything's the same. It should be exactly what was approved before, and then outside of that, it's just building code stuff. But I think it'd be nice. Be nice for that area and fill that in, and you're right.
I make a motion. We
Second.
adjourn.
Aye.
Aye.